Hi, my name is Bob Rankin. I'm an artist, I'm an adventurer traveler, I'm a scuba diver. I love anything that has to do with water. I, as an artist, wanted to find out what can I possibly do to come up with a different approach to painting the water, painting underwater. I had a great experience a couple of years ago to have my first open water dive in the wonderful country of Fiji. I had just been certified to dive at the Roseville Rock Quarry, which was a 40 or 50 foot dive, and then suddenly I was turned out in this boat in Fiji for a 100-foot dive. I was absolutely mesmerized. As I started to descend, the dive master had to come back and get me at least 10 different times because I became so transfixed on those individual compositions. The colors, the intensity of the colors, it was just like a whole new world had opened up to me, and I wanted to see how I could possibly capture that on canvas. For example, as I would go past one huge wall of living coral, they would be waving, they would be extending out 3, 4, 5 feet. And as you went past a wall of polyps on this incredible rainbow reef, they would pop out and then pop back in. And the colors were so intense and so vibrant, and the textures were unbelievable. So obviously I didn't have a sketchbook or a camera down there. It was my first open water dive, and I was just trying to A, stay alive, but also to capture this in my memory and to see how I could bring it to life on a canvas. So the thing that I kept thinking about was the movement of the fish, but also the intense colors, but most importantly, the texture. How can I capture that texture on a canvas? I thought, well, I've done some textural pieces in the past. For example, I started off using texture when I wanted to capture the waves breaking down at Wrightsville Beach. And with that in mind, I did the entire background surface in modeling paste. This is an absolutely terrific medium to work with. Some people or some companies call it molding paste or modeling paste, but I build the surface up primarily in white, or I might tint it a little bit. And so we're going to go ahead and get started on that today, and I'll show you how you can lay this out. Now, I've come upon this new product that I like a lot, and it's called Gloves in a Bottle. And all you have to do is use just a little bit of a squirt here. It really goes a long way. And what this does is it protects your skin from any toxins that might be in either oil paint, or in the case of today we're using acrylic paint, also works with watercolor, and it protects your skin. Now, I like to really dig into the paint. So paint's flying all around my studio, and it obviously is going to get on my hands as well. Well, once you're finished painting, then the cleanup is almost like it's magic as well. The paint just falls off. So I strongly recommend that product. So I've gone ahead and tinted this modeling paste, and I'm going to be using, because I'm doing a large 4 by 6 foot canvas here, I'm going to be using a large palette knife. This is a teardrop palette knife, and I just think it works great. I love the edge of it. I love how it really smooths out this modeling paste. The consistency, and modeling paste comes in many different consistencies. There's a light modeling paste. There's also a heavier duty modeling paste, which I'm using today. And it has the consistency of perhaps oil paint. You can get some that comes in a consistency that's more similar to Mazola oil or cooking oil, but I like this because it really builds up. Look how it holds onto this palette, and it's great. You can really extend it out from the surface. So as I'm starting on this, I'm going to be starting from the top and working down on the canvas. I'm obviously working flat because this is impasto style medium, and with that in mind, I just liberally apply it. Now, what I'm thinking about here when I'm doing this are these different walls of the descent of the dive. For example, when I'm coming down that wall, you'll have areas that really extend out. You'll have areas that create somewhat of a cave-like dwelling for the fish habitat. And then I'll come out and pop out some of these living corals like that. And again, using this and using a lot of this medium so it spreads out. This will take approximately, depending on the humidity in your area, it often takes a good half a day to a day for it to set up before you can then come back in and paint on top of it. Now the modeling paste itself obviously can be tinted like I've done here with a flow style acrylic paint, and then I'm going to be painting on top of this. So most of the color that you see at this point will disappear back behind the superficial color. So the first thing I'm doing, of course, is just to get the composition down. What's going to make for a strong composition with this coral life? It's very similar to as if you were preparing and setting up a fascinating aquarium at home. When I was growing up, my first art experience was winning first place in the Raleigh Christmas Parade, and it was a whole $10. It was for the best decorated bicycle, and I decided that, well, I'm going to take that $10, and back then you could actually buy an entire aquarium setup for $10. Well, I've always been fascinated with fish. I love to go fishing. I have some lake property that I'm developing up in Virginia, and anytime I'm around water, I'm just very, very comfortable. And it just makes me, I hope, a more interesting artist in person. Now look what I'm doing here in terms of the negative space as well. I'm obviously thinking that the white space back here is equally as important as all the texture that I'm applying at this point. And before I start to really control this texture, I'm just getting the basic composition down to see how well it works. This stuff remains malleable for a good half an hour or 40 minutes, so you don't have to work as fast as I'm doing for this demonstration. This is a real active medium to work in because you can dig into it and really have a lot of fun. So I'm going to, at this point, look at the composition to see how it's working in terms of the positive and negative space. And what I'll think I'll do is I'll increase the top part of this. Now is when the fun time comes about. This is when I go back in and want to think about all the many hundreds of different types of textures that I saw while I was scuba diving. So let's experiment. Let's see what we can come up with. I know that at some of the dive, at some time I was seeing some wonderful heavy built-up brain coral. So at this point what I'm going to do is really manipulate and push that brush around. Now, the palette knife around. And you can see how that's creating an absolutely great surface in its own right. And it's just by changing the style and method in which I'm painting. Now, what happens if we again change it? Instead of using the side of the palette knife, in this case, I'm going to really use the edge of it, and I'm patting it down. And it's also, at the same time that it's doing that, it's picking up some of that other surface underneath. So I've had a wonderful opportunity to study these different textures, and then it just becomes a process of how can I push this paint around the palette and onto the great surface of the canvas so that we have all these different textures working together. In this case, I'm just barely touching the surface of the canvas and lifting the edge of the palette knife at the same time. So here you can see you have a really fine texture over in this area. Then I've come back in and done something that almost looks a little bit more geometric there, and I'm constantly thinking about the corals that I experienced when I was diving. So coming over to this area in the center of the canvas, I'm going to take a clue from the great fan coral that I saw there and just use some really quick blades and quick strokes here, as if this was just meandering and waving in the current, the water current, and see how that works. And again, this is just barely touching the canvas, but I like a lot of that negative space showing through there in that particular part of the canvas. Over here, I'm thinking that I might want to go back in and repeat some of that texture that I had before, and I used over on the other side of that canvas. And this just, again, lifts it up, creates a wonderful surface that we're going to then come back in and paint on top of. This is all underground. So when we have this finished product, for example, over here, when I'm working on this canvas, and this is the finished Fiji fish, you can see that none of the understructure will be showing in terms of this aqua color that I've used there. So the process will develop as this starts to dry up. And now I'm going to come back in and finish this other part and see what type of texture we can come in with. In this case, I'm going to use the point of the palette knife, and look at these great lines that you can create with that. And it really pushes that modeling paste all around, and it creates a real energy and its own little vitality here. I really like how that turned out, and I haven't experimented with that before, but I like it. So I'm going to try it one more time over on this side of the canvas and see what happens. So I'm just repeating that real strong linear work. Now keep in mind that I've just used one type of palette knife, which is kind of an over-exaggerated teardrop palette knife. There are many, many, many different types of palette knives out there. Feel free to experiment with those. But I also find and take great satisfaction in using found objects that I have at home. For example, a plastic fork. What happens when I take that plastic fork and I just rake it through that great modeling paste? I've actually used garden utensils. I've used spatulas before. I've used a cake decorating kit before to create all the different textures. Always trying to experiment and try something new. Look at this built up here, where all of these different systems are overlapping. I'm constantly questioning, if that works so well there, how would it work if I combine it with something that I've already done? Here you have some large lines, and now in the foreground I'm going to bring a finer texture in. And again, keeping it really nice and loose. You can't be tentative with this. If you're uptight and you're just working in one little section, it's going to read as such. And this is all about the movement and the freedom of the current underwater. Now, at this point I'll take a look, I'll step back, I'll see whether I like the composition. I think it works okay at this point. But now is the exciting part. I call it the cake decorating part. And you can actually use a disposable cake decorating kit. And this is modeling paste. It's not been tinted like the modeling paste has been tinted here. And I'm just using an old Ziploc bag, but you need to use the freezer bags because they will hold up under a lot of pressure, as opposed to the regular sandwich bags or something. And you can actually create and cut out different designs in the tip of this baggie. Or you can get, like I said, a disposable cake decorating kit. I'm just going to take a little nip out of that. I'll test it in an area that I don't worry about and see what happens there. And you can see that that's not going to flow enough. The hole's not large enough. So I'm then going to come back in and cut out a little bit more. And now watch what happens. I'm going to do this in an area like this. Oh, look at how that builds up. And depending on how much pressure you put in the bag, you can get all sorts of different designs. Look at that design coming out there, kind of a rippled effect. And that's very similar to what you'll see on a really interesting dive site. So I'll do that there. I'll oftentimes extend it out white on white up here Again, using movement when I'm applying this so that it looks like the natural habitat. Coming over here, I'm going to try the bag. I'm going to take the bag and just try it in an entirely different way, where I'm just barely touching it, but again using a lot of pressure coming out and then overlapping so I can really build up some texture and a lot of different surface tension here. I'm going to continue with a different type of design now, and this is almost like you're making candy kisses, those chocolate kisses, and yet what I'm doing, it's very similar to cake decorating and actually applying surfaces that stick up even further. So as I'm applying a dollop of this modeling paste, I'm pushing up, and that's what forms that wonderful candy kiss. But this is also, if I'm thinking when I was on the dive, it's very similar to how the polyps looked when they retreated back into their wonderful home. They looked like little candy kisses stuck on top of the already living coral. So that's just, again, creates a different texture, a wonderful surface that when we come back in and paint on top of, it'll give me some other wonderful color opportunities to work with. That's a great different texture there as well. So what I'll do at this point is I'll let it set up. It'll probably take overnight depending on the heat and humidity, and then I'll come back in the morning and see how it works. At that time I can either add more of the modeling paste to it, or I'll just go ahead and start working from the background. But we need that little extra time to set up. We'll be back in the very near future. Thank you.